one reason that I got interested in this book, which is about sales, is that readers asked me some questions after reading Drive, and one of the main questions was, what about salespeople? The argument of Drive is that these if-then rewards often don't work. And they said, well, what about salespeople? They're all commissioned, they're almost always fueled by commissions. What about salespeople? And I said, interesting, let me check it out. And I noticed in doing some research and then hearing from some companies, a number of companies that were eliminating commissions for their sales force and seeing sales go up. It's kind of freaky. And so I started getting really interested in sales because I didn't know much about it, and so I decided to do a whole book on it. And the book is essentially this, that there are two big arguments in the book. One is that today we're all in sales now. If you look at what white-collar workers around the world are doing, they're spending an enormous portion of their time convincing, persuading, cajoling, influencing people. Sometimes they're selling in the sense of getting someone else to buy an item, but in many cases they're just trying to get someone else to give up resources of time, effort, attention, something like that. And I have some really, really cool, interesting data showing that roughly 40% of white-collar workers' time on the job is spent in that other form of sales. So that's one thing. The other thing is that most people don't like sales. Sales doesn't have a very good reputation. And we did this interesting research asking people what they thought about sales, and the words that kept coming up were things like slimy, sleazy, smarmy, and it's very understandable, but my argument is that that view of sales is a function of the conditions in which sales have usually taken place. Most of what we know about sales was for a world of information asymmetry, where the seller always had more information than the buyer. When the seller has more information than the seller can rip people off. But those days of information asymmetry are over. So it used to be going to buy a car at a dealership, the seller always had more information. Now buyers have as much information as the car sellers. And so in a world of information asymmetry, the watchwords are caveat emptor, buyer beware. Today, in a world of information parity, it's caveat venditor, seller beware. And what that's doing is it's forcing more and more sellers, again, whether they're in traditional sales or non-sales selling, this other form of sales, forcing more people to the high road of honesty, fairness, transparency. And so the book makes that argument and then talks about, if this is right, what are the particular qualities a person needs to master? What are the particular skills a person needs to develop? We used to believe that only some people are in sales. Today, we're all in sales. So there's some interesting reasons for that. One of them is the rise of small entrepreneurs, and so any entrepreneur is inherently in sales. Another reason is elasticity of skills, so that if you look at how people are actually working, there's less segmentation in what people actually do on their job. They have to be more elastic in their skills, and that elasticity is often encompassing some form of selling, either the traditional sales or the non-sales selling. And then if you look around the world, especially in places like Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, much of Western Europe, the big growth industries are education and healthcare, which are all about changing behavior. And so one of the ideas is that it used to be only some of us are in sales. Now all of us are in sales in some fashion, but also that sales isn't what it used to be. It's not, sales no longer is the slick-looking guy in the plaid sport jacket trying to rip you off in a car lot. It's much more sophisticated than that. I do think that this ability to persuade, convince others, for me to say, part with resources, make this exchange and we'll both be better off, is fundamental to human beings. I think that it's been necessary for our species to evolve. And so it is actually a much more fundamentally human act than we tend to give it credit for. But in this new world of selling, again, in a world of caveat emptor, where the seller has all of the cards, you don't have to be as human or as noble. In a world of caveat venditor, you do. And so what I found is that the particular abilities that matter most in all forms of sales today are very different. And they're the new ABCs. Attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. In the old world of sales, it's ABC, always be closing, the kind of steamroller. ABC, always be closing. The new ABCs are attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. Attunement is understanding things from someone else's perspective. Buoyancy is when all of us are in sales, all of us are getting rejected a lot. One salesman I talked to talks about sales being an ocean of rejection. And so how do you remain buoyant on that ocean of rejection? There's some interesting science showing what do you do before, during, and after a sales encounter. And then clarity, there's a premium, there used to be a premium on problem solving. Now I think there's a much greater premium on problem finding, on identifying problems people didn't realize that they have. And so clarity is the ability to cut through the muck, not to access information, but to curate it, to frame choices in ways that clarify the situation for prospective people. So the ABCs are the 3 qualities. And then I talk about some of the particular abilities, which are to pitch, to improvise, and to serve. And so some really, really cool stuff there too. Well, that's a really, really interesting question. And I write about a couple of growth companies that are taking a very different approach there. A couple of, two software companies in particular. One of which has $100 million in annual sales. The other one has $300 million in annual sales. Pretty big, growing, successful companies. They don't have any salespeople. One of these companies is doing $250 million a year in sales without salespeople. How do they do that? Well, essentially, it's just sort of this Zen sort of paradox where nobody's in sales because everybody's in sales. So this one company called Palantir, they use what are called forward deployed engineers. So they put their engineers on site to help install the software. They run very sophisticated software that a lot of defense establishments, national security agencies use to detect terrorist threats, police departments use to detect crime patterns. So they put their people in the settings, and they're not salespeople, they're just really good engineers who help the customers solve their problems and find their problems, and that's what sells. And so there's this weird paradox is that they have no salespeople because everybody's in salespeople, everybody's a salesperson, but no one's called a salesperson because everyone's a salesperson. It's a brand new world because there is this much greater elasticity of what people have to do on the job, and a lot of that elasticity is encompassing some form of selling, but it isn't. The engineers who are quote unquote selling the software are not the kind of slick, glad-hander, stereotypical salespeople. What can I do to put you in a Buick today? But are actually very astute at understanding problems, understanding other people, helping people find problems that they don't realize that they have, helping them solve existing problems, and doing it in a way that is actually very service-oriented. Not only service in the sense of getting your pizza delivered in 30 minutes or less, but service in the sense of actually serving people and making their lives better.